Donald Trump has announced that he will push the FBI and the Department of Justice to investigate Bill Clinton's links to Jeffrey Epstein, along with Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, J.P. Morgan, and others. He frames Epstein as a Democrat, insists that all the arrows point to the left, and tells his supporters to stop wasting time looking at Trump. On one level, this is familiar. Clinton did fly to Epstein's place on Epstein's plane. Summers did correspond with him. Hoffman did mix with him in technical circles. J.P. Morgan did do business with him and has since expressed regret. Those are serious lapses of judgment. But here is the important point. So far, in the new document releases, there is still no credible evidence that Clinton or the others were personally involved in Epstein's trafficking crimes. They deny wrongdoing. The material we have seen doesn't disprove those denials. In fact, in the latest tranche of emails, Epstein tells a journalist that Clinton was never on the island. That doesn't make Clinton virtuous, but it does quietly undercut Trump's most lurid claims. So why push Clinton to the front of the stage now? Because Clinton functions as a human shield. The more oxygen burned on Clinton's name, the less oxygen available for three threads that point back uncomfortably to Trump himself. The first thread is small in size but vast in implication. In the material released by congressional committees, there is a page from Epstein's 2003 birthday book. It's not just a casual card, it's a curated set of greetings from powerful men. On one page, there's a crude sketch of a woman and a typed note, apparently signed by in Trump style. It doesn't simply say happy birthday, it talks about our enigmas and ends with the line, may every day be another wonderful secret. In isolation, you might shrug. Strange phrase, odd tone, perhaps nothing more than the vulgar in-joke of two rich men who think that they are fascinating, maybe some sort of Masonic code. But that phrase, wonderful secret, next to what we now know about Epstein's cooperation and operation, his pattern of hidden abuse, his fondness for compromising information, and the note takes on a different colour, doesn't it? It suggests intimacy, shared knowledge, shared dealings, things that must never be discussed in daylight. Trump denies it is his note. Perhaps he is telling the truth. Yet if it is genuine, it points to a relationship that runs far deeper than we bumped into each other at parties in Palm Beach. It hints at a pattern of shared concealment. You do not go to this much trouble to bury a casual birthday joke. The second thread is the federal investigation, killed from above. It's more serious because it concerns the machinery of the state. After Epstein's death, there were two parallel stories. One was the mythology about a magical client list lurking in some sealed envelope ready to blow up the establishment. The other was the boring, patient work of federal prosecutors and FBI agents interviewing survivors, following money, tracing names. The public was encouraged to stare at the first story. The real danger lay in the second. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York had spoken to nearly 50 women. They had identified at least 20 additional individuals who, on the survivors' accounts, were not bystanders but active participants or facilitators. They had open leads, scheduled interviews, a living co-conspirator in Ghislaine Maxwell, and momentum. Then the case was yanked out of New York, moved to Washington, placed under the control of political appointees, and quietly suffocated. Months later, the Department of Justice issued a dry memo. No credible evidence of a wider conspiracy, no client list, nothing to see here. The implication was brutal. Those 50 women were either mistaken or lying. To justify this, the new FBI director appeared before Congress and instead of defending his own agents' work, cast doubt on the witnesses' reliability. The survivors who had relived their trauma in interviews were treated as public relations problems. This is not a case that ended because the trail went cold, it's a case that ended because it got too hot. And you have to ask the obvious question, who benefits most when that kind of investigation dies in Washington? The third thread here, Ghislaine Maxwell and the price of silence. The third thread is the one that should keep people awake at night. Ghislaine Maxwell is the last person alive who truly knows the full map of Epstein's world. She knows the names, the locations, the logistics, the leverage. When Epstein died, many men thought the danger died with him. It did not, it shifted. Reports from inside the system now suggest that Maxwell is not living the standard life of a convicted trafficker. She is cushioned, she is guarded, she is in effect in a kind of protective custody, shielded from the brutalities that other women in federal prison endure. And she is said to be preparing an application for a commutation from the Trump administration. Not a full pardon, which would be too blatant, a commutation, early release. Just enough mercy to ensure that she never publicly unlocks those wonderful secrets. If that happens, it is not simply corruption, it is the visible conclusion of a bargain. Survivors give their testimony, risk everything, and are smeared as unreliable. The architect of the operation keeps quiet and walks free. There is no more savage message than you could send to victims of powerful men. Now, these three threads would be troubling enough without the theatre layered on top. But consider the wider pattern, this shell game. For years, Trump and his allies have pumped oxygen into the fantasy of a hidden client list that the deep state refused to reveal. His Attorney General, Pam Bondi, went on television and claimed that the list was literally on Obama's desk. Influencers promised a coming storm, a great unmasking. Supporters were encouraged to obsess over this mythic document. Meanwhile, in the real world, the New York investigation was doing the slow work of building cases against actual co-conspirators. When that work threatened to reach men who mattered, the administration did three things. 1. It pulled the case to Washington and killed it. 2. It issued a memo saying there was no client list and no wider conspiracy. 3. It then ridiculed its own supporters for having believed in the list that the administration had been feeding them. It is an expert piece of misdirection. You invent a fake scandal to conceal a real one. You weaponize conspiracy thinking to protect genuinely compromised elites. You blame the people you misled when they realize they have been betrayed. The Clinton story sits neatly inside this pattern. He is the perfect decoy. The name is famous, the history is messy, the press cannot resist. You've got to remember the stained dress. While everyone argues about flight logs from 20 years ago, nobody asks why the Department of Justice strangled an active trafficking investigation last year. Now, place all that beside the GB News interview and the row with the BBC. In that interview, Trump speaks at length about many things, how he saved the American economy, how he alone restored military recruitment, how Europe is being destroyed by immigration, how climate policy is a hoax, how Scotland is being ruined by wind turbines, how he will sue the BBC for $1 billion over an edited clip of his January the 6th speech, how he is a good father, how Britain should exploit the North Sea. Oh my goodness. On its own, the BBC case matters. If a broadcaster significantly distorts a political speech, that is serious and should be challenged. The problem is how this sits in the larger pattern. Every minute spent on that edit, every headline about legal action against the BBC, every segment about crime in London or wind farms in Aberdeen is a minute not spent on those three threads: the birthday note, the dead investigation, the Maxwell commutation. This is what Steve Bannon once called flooding the zone. You drown the public in grievance and spectacle so that one thing that could truly damage you is lost under the noise. You get a president who will happily talk for an hour about Scottish golf courses, London knife crime, net zero, his devotion to his children, his deep love of the military, yet somehow never has time to explain why his Justice Department told 50 trafficking survivors that their evidence was not credible. You get a media cycle where Clinton is discussed endlessly, the BBC is blamed endlessly, Ghislaine Maxwell's potential early release is barely mentioned. Beneath this sits a deeper constitutional problem. The presidency in any functioning republic is not personal property, it is a temporary trust. The Department of Justice exists to uphold the law without fear or favour. The FBI exists to gather facts, not to humiliate victims on cue. What we have seen instead is the construction of a government of loyalists. Watch the casting. An Attorney General whose job is not to protect the law, but to protect the President. An FBI Director who will publicly undermine the witnesses his own agents interviewed. Inspectors General, career prosecutors, independent voices quietly removed or frozen out. For every appointment, for every appointee willing to sign the memo that kills an Epstein investigation, there are 10 professionals who would refuse. They are sidelined, reassigned, pushed out. The antibodies of the system are removed. What remains is a shell that looks like a Justice Department, staffed by people who understand, without needing explicit orders, that their real task is to shield wonderful secrets. That is what I mean by catastrophic character failure. The office does not ennoble the occupant, it reveals them. In this case, it has revealed someone so afraid of his own history that he will cheerfully sacrifice the credibility of the FBI, the independence of the DOJ, and the dignity of survivors to keep that history buried. At the heart of all this, and it must never be forgotten, are the women and girls whose lives were shattered. They were abused as children and teenagers by wealthy men who told them nobody would ever believe them. They saw Epstein escape serious punishment with a sweetheart deal in Florida. They learned early that the justice system bends under pressure. Yet they came forward. They sat in rooms with federal agents. They named names. They described locations. They handed the state a road map. And what did they receive? Their case was pulled. Their testimony was dismissed as lacking credible evidence. The head of the FBI implied and their accounts did not meet the standard. The one convicted co-conspirator at the centre of the web, Maxwell, is reportedly enjoying cushioned conditions and positioning herself for mercy. If that commutation comes, it will be the final message written in policy rather than ink, and to the survivors it says, you are expendable. To Maxwell and men like her, you are invaluable, as long as you keep quiet. That is not simply a legal choice, it is a moral atrocity. So we come back to where we started. Every time Trump points at Clinton, understand that as a flare. He wants you to look at the Democrat he has chosen as scapegoat, not at the documents with his own handwriting. He wants hours of television on an edited BBC clip. Not one serious inquiry into why his Justice Department strangled an active trafficking case and said these witnesses were not credible. This is not about whether you like Trump's energy policy or his views on immigration or his battle with woke corporations or his concerns about Scotland. It is about whether you are prepared to accept a standard in which the president can corrupt the justice system to bury his own entanglement with a sex trafficker. And then possibly free that trafficker's chief accomplice in return for her silence. If we normalize that, and we're heading in that direction, we are not just lowering the bar for one man, we are writing the instruction manual for every future authoritarian. The choice is stark. We either insist that the rule of law applies upwards as well as downwards, that survivors' voices count even when they embarrass the powerful, that the president is not a shelter for wonderful secrets, or we surrender to a cynical shrug that says everyone is corrupt, nothing matters, and we may as well look the other way. At that point, the distraction has succeeded, hasn't it? The shield has done its work, and the real story will stay buried with the people who paid so much to keep it hidden.